Hello and welcome to the 2022 SABR Analytics Conference. I'm SABR CEO Scott Bush, and I'm thrilled to have you joining us for the 11th year of this event, where we bring together some of the sharpest people from throughout the baseball industry to discuss, debate, and share insightful ways to analyze, examine, and celebrate the great game of baseball. The last few years have provided no shortage of topics to research. Sports gambling has proliferated across the country. COVID-affected seasons introduced ghost runners to the game, and biomechanics has continued to emerge as essential data for any baseball ops department. We will cover all of these topics and much more over the course of the weekend. Before getting started tonight, I want to take a moment to thank some of the people and organizations that made this conference possible. First, our research presentation selection committee. These folks did a great job of ensuring that the presentations you see this weekend are sound in their approach and come to the appropriate conclusions. Thanks to Joe Rosales, Mark Simon, and Sarah Thompson of Sports Info Solutions, Phil Birnbaum of SABR, Rob Nyer of the West Coast League, Harry Pavlidis of Baseball Prospectus, Meg Rowley of Fangraphs, Jason Thiemanson of Illinois Wesleyan University, and Meredith Wills of SMT. I would also like to thank this year's panelists and presenters. While we haven't had a normal year for quite some time, it is a testament to our panelists and presenters that they are finding time to participate in this conference while they are all even busier than they would normally be in the spring. The annual Diamond Dollars Case Competition is the work of Analytics Conference co-founder and former SABR board president Vince Gennaro. We are excited to be hosting 20 student teams in tomorrow's competition, and I want to thank Vince for his hard work in making the event happen. Thanks to the SABR staff, Scott Carter, Jacob Pomrenke, and Jessica Smith for their continued remote efforts to deliver a great virtual conference experience. I also want to thank our sponsors for helping make this event possible. First, our presenting sponsors, Major League Baseball and Rawlings. As part of our relationship with MLB, SABR is proud to be hosting a cohort of students from traditionally underrepresented backgrounds this weekend. Also sponsoring the conference this year are Sports Info Solutions, the sponsor of our student programming, Baseball Reference, the sponsor of tonight's programming, and Rapsodo, the University of the Pacific's Eberhart School of Business, SMT, and Blast Motion. Also, our team sponsors, the Colorado Rockies, Chicago Cubs, and Milwaukee Brewers. All of those teams made big moves yesterday. Is that a coincidence? Yes. Finally, a note about SABR. The Society for American Baseball Research is a 501c3 nonprofit organization with more than 7,000 members worldwide. Our members participate in a wide range of baseball research, including 19th century baseball, the Negro Leagues, baseball and the arts, and much more. If you're at this conference and not already a member, I hope you'll consider joining us. Now, on to the conference. Brian Kenny has been the opener of our conference for many years. Brian is a host at MLB Network, where he appears across the network's programming, including MLB Now and MLB Tonight. He is also the author of Ahead of the Curve, Inside the Baseball Revolution. A 25-year national TV and radio veteran, Brian joined MLB Network from ESPN, where he was a SportsCenter anchor, host of the Brian Kenny Show on ESPN Radio, and an Emmy-winning anchor for Baseball Tonight. We are excited to have a tandem for the opener this year. Joining Brian this year is Sarah Langs. Sarah is a reporter and researcher for MLB.com and appears on the MLB Network. She has been with MLB since 2019. Previously, she was a senior researcher at ESPN, researching Baseball Tonight and contributing research-driven content to ESPN.com. Brian and Sarah, thanks so much for opening this year's conference.
All right, Scott, thank you so much. Sarah, it's good to have you alongside. Always a pleasure to work with you. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much to everyone involved in planning all of the tireless efforts. And to you, BK, it's always so much fun to talk with you. And we get to talk baseball, which is the best thing in the world.
And you and I, Sarah, get to work on top 10 right now together. You're part of the sabermetric super panel. Maybe that's kind of an outdated notion at this point, but it's like at the time it was like, we're actually going to have people who analyze baseball. We're going to let them go on TV and analyze baseball. That was kind of a new thing at one point. Vince Gennaro, it was on the panel this year on the sabermetric super panel with Sarah and Mike Petriello. So we do this show, which is devoted to comparative analysis. And I thought we would talk about that in our opening remarks, because I've noticed something fascinating. So if this is not a typical, state of analytics 2022. Look, it's pervasive through the game. We know, and it's a broad subject. Here's something specific, transcending, and I think fascinating, and something I've been able to watch in real time. We've been doing Top 10 right now, I think for 10 full years now that I've been hosting it. And we have a thing in the Top 10 right now called the Shredder. And we list the top 10 players at each position. And we have a thing called the Shredder, which is just kind of a gimmick. It's a formula that we put together, and it churns out a list, and we put it in order, and then we don't mess with it. We don't say, this guy's too low, this guy's too high. No, the results are the results, and that's it. We then bring, I'm hosting, I have my own top 10 list. We have usually, the ex-player analyst from MLB Network that is the co-host that with me, usually a guy who played that position. He has his list. We have the sabermetric super panel. They have their lists. We have a fan list. And this year I invited a number of people on to just come on as a one-off, come in, jump in. We have Bob Costas and Bill James, Saris, just jump in. Give me your top 10 at this position. And what's amazing to me is at the very beginning of Top 10 right now, the Shredder was extremely controversial. They used to run clips on other shows on the network and say, what is the Shredder thinking? Is Brian Kenny the Shredder? What's he thinking? The Shredder needs to go back in for repairs. Shredder's broken. And he used to mock it all the time. And there used to be these, big controversial arguments about different players between the player and me and the Shredder. It was vastly different. We bring other people in, and there was a wild divergence in the lists. And now, Sarah, you've been doing it 3 years.
Yep.
And what did we talk about this year? We've all become the Shredder. Our lists are not identical, but basically, essentially the same lists. And we don't compare notes or anything else. So I want to start there. Like, Sarah, what do you look at? And when you're doing your notes and doing your lists, which is probably around Christmas time, we're all doing it separately. And we don't call Petriello, don't talk to Vince, don't talk to anybody, doing your own list. Tell me about your process, and then thinking about, wow, am I getting it right? Am I getting it wrong?
Well, the first year I did it, I really had no idea where to start. It's this momentous task of, oh my gosh, I'm going to be on TV and having to defend a list, because you know me, and hopefully some people listening here have seen me on MLB Network. The number one thing that I always stand by when I'm talking about baseball or anything is I want to be able to prove it. And when you're talking about a list, when you're talking about the difference between 8 and 9, it can be so painstaking to try to make that point. And we often talk about, 7, 8, 9 here are pretty much the same. But I really wanted to make sure I would be able to defend each and every spot on that list. So the way I did it, and we've never actually discussed this. I've never asked you your process. So I'm curious if this is at all similar to what you do. And maybe I get a little bit of how the sausage is made. But for me, I like to start sort of off the top of my head. Think of who are the first few guys, maybe 10 to 15 guys who I think of when I think of that position. And I'm not really putting them in an order, putting them in a Google Doc, and I'm just thinking through those players. And then I'll go through and I'll make a bunch of lists, and I'm sure these will be familiar to everybody listening in. I will look at Fangraphs, where I'll look at Baseball Reference, where I'll look through a bunch of defensive metrics. I'll look into things like whiff rate and chase rate if we're talking, honestly, we're talking about pitchers or hitters, depending in which direction. And I'll sort of get my idea of who is the best at overall, kind of combining it. WAR is a wonderful stat in that it gives us sort of a broader look, but we all know there are flaws. It's not an end all be all. So I'm kind of trying to add to my own interpretation of WAR and add in other things that I find important. I combine that with, okay, who were the first guys I thought of? And that's when I start trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to list all of them? And I'll admit, my method isn't perfect. This year, in a show that already aired, I totally whiffed on Jorge Polanco. He was playing second base this year for the first time really regularly. So he was on the second base list. He came up in some of my shortstop searches because I didn't mention this, I'm not just looking at the prior year. I'm looking over the last couple of years. And of course,
Right.
the shredder looks at a 3-year sample. I'm looking at 5 years, 3 years, 2 years. I kind of go through all of those. But because of how I was setting my minimums, I just kind of missed him. And I felt awful about it. I said it on air. But that's sort of how I do it. It's important to me that even though we're talking about something that is supposed to be so numerical, I like to think of who do I think of first here? Because to me, that does tell me who stands out. And with the way that I interact with the game, how much time I spend watching every single major league game in the season, and how much time I spend going through box scores and going over leaderboards, I know that my sort of perception of whether I think of a guy is going to be at least a good starting point. I'm hopefully, Jorge Polanco was not a number one. He was sort of in that 5 through 10. And I'm going to make sure I never forget someone in that top 5 sort of area.
Well, and yet, even listening to your process, and I'm sure you could do a half hour more on what you do, as
Yeah.
I could, I'm sure Mike Petriello could, and yet our lists are essentially the same.
Yeah.
So what I think the big question is, have we all arrived at the best way to evaluate players, or are we all just thinking the same again? So which do you think it is? And will we look 5 years from now and say, what were we thinking just going by our numbers? Look, the numbers I like, I'll let you know, are of course very similar to the Shredder's formula because I'm in on that. I'm in on that. And our researchers, Eric Nays, Nate Purrington, they do a great job, but we all talk about it. The one wrinkle big wrinkle we made was we use relief pitching 2-year sample now because it's just too volatile. When you get the third year, you're not even talking about the same relief pitcher at this point. So which do you think it is? Are we doing it as good as it possibly can be done? Or are we just now all in a new state of groupthink?
I think we're doing it very close to the best as it can possibly be done. I mean, you and I were talking, preparing for this awesome conversation, and I mentioned to you, I wonder if this means we've reached sort of mature design. And as you're going to see over the course of this conference, everybody listening in, there's so many new realms to still be explored, especially with biomechanics and sort of that more scientific part. But I think in terms of the actual statistics, we have so much at our fingertips. I mean, one thing I was thinking about earlier today is even defensive metrics are so much more advanced than 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I mean, I heard Sports Info Solutions as one of the presenting sponsors. They do a great job with defensive runs saved. And of course, at MLB.com with Baseball Savant, we have outs above average, which now are so specific. We can consider something like the speed of the runner. So all of this is to say that I think we are on the same path in a good way. I don't think this is just the new group thing. I do think that baseball is really, truly being analyzed and broken down in ways that it never has been before. But I do think there's still so many more new roads for opportunity. And we are going to look back in 5 years and say, why was he anywhere near that list? But I think it'll be for reasons we can't even fathom at a moment like this.
Right. I thought StatCast, when that came in, it was like, oh, wow, I start looking at all those again. My list doesn't change dramatically. Maybe more toward the bottom of the list, like Marcelo Zuna was a guy who was not getting good results, but was still hitting the ball hard. But at a certain point, I often put in, but he had 2 years of being hit unlucky, 2 years of being BABIP. I don't think so. There's something else we're not understanding here. So I'm not buying that. Oh, he's hitting the ball hard, but not getting good results. Yeah, a little bit of that, but not a ton. And the other thing, the biggest thing that I've learned, and I think this is part of being in SABR, is I thought with more information, it would get easier. With more information, it gets harder. And Sarah, I think it gets more imprecise, where like I'm looking to take a flyer on a guy now and then. One of the few, we've had very few disagreements, Sarah. One is where I've gone to say, all right, we're all talking the same language. I can't take it. I got to do something. Got to take a flyer on somebody. And it's surprising to me that I've like now done this heel turn. And each year I have Yadier Molina in my top 10, and you whiz kids, won't rank him. So I'm looking at it like it's not just what I call cut of jib index. I like the cut of his jib. He's got the square jaw and he looks like a leader out there. Not that. Real world economics. In the real world, 6 months of a baseball season, I think I want Yadier Molina, not over Will Smith, right? Not over JT Realmuto, but over like Carson Kelly and Omar Narvaez, 6 through 10. So what do you make of that? Like, am I clinging to some nostalgia or looking at some intangible thing behind the plate? Or am I right, Sarah? That's what I'm looking for. What do you think?
Well, I ultimately think this is why baseball is so great, because we can be having this conversation. I really don't see this in other sports. You don't quite get that Yadier Molina type. Every now and then, there's a center in football who's been there forever and is so, so much adulation, but very rarely in other sports can you be advocating so hard for a guy to be number 9 on a list, even though he's a 37-year-old catcher, even though he is not hitting the way he used to. And this is what I think makes baseball so wonderful. But, my approach and my thought with being on the SABR panel is always to put the players who I think are the 10 best in terms of what I analyze. And of course, we don't have cut of jib index. We don't have that intangible. We don't have a number for that yet. And I know that Joan Ryan wrote a book about this, and I know that there have been attempts to try to quantify sort of the intangibles, and we'll never get there because then they wouldn't be intangibles. But I do think that that is sort of that last frontier, and that is what plays into so many 9 and 10 decisions and taking a flyer on a guy, just having that idea of who he is. Maybe it's because, we're all part of sort of this reporting world as well. If you know that a guy has had tremendous impact with young players, whatever other stories you've been told, that can absolutely play in, but we're not going to see that on Fangraphs or Baseball Reference or any other site. I love the Yadier Molina conversation every year. I'm always sitting there as we start taping catchers, getting ready for it because it's so much fun. And I mean, it's just wonderful. But if you go to stats, of course, you're not putting him there. So you can be right because I will always let you be right. But
I thank you. Just tell me that to my face. I love that you guys don't rank them. I think each year you're going to ruin it for me and spoil it. But I'm not even looking at like soft things like, no, first of all, calling pitches and pitch sequencing as a catcher. It's not some intangible. It's a tangible. Yeah. We just don't know how to quantify exactly what he's doing. The other part, though, is I find, look, the Yankees just made trades, right? And they changed their infield, the left side of their infield, to 2 very competitive guys, which I like in the real world, right? Isaiah Kiner-Falefa and Josh Donaldson. But I can find stats to back up their competitive fire. Most of it's base running, and some of it is contact, maximizing their skills, and defensive work as well. Multiple positions for Kiner-Falefa, also just being fundamentally sound. And that, I believe, when you're watching a game, you'll see guys you like. And I think the old school way of saying, that guy's a winner, we just lack the language to tell you why he's a winner. I use that all the time. I say Chase Utley is a winner, but Chase Utley's a winner because he runs the bases. He will take somebody out at second base and break their leg. He will field his position very well. He'll do all these things. He'll make contact. I brought up an Anthony Rizzo specific at bat yesterday saying this is why Yankee fans love this guy against Hyunjin Ryu. He had an RBI on an 0-2 count, just sprayed the ball to left field, understanding the situation. And that was it's not a hard hit ball percentage. He didn't barrel it, Sarah, but he did the right thing in that situation. So I think there are things that are in the weeds when you're watching that the old boys were probably right about, that we just don't have the language. Bill James has written about this, the language to specifically bring it up and quantify it. But we should try to apply it. So yeah, I advocate cut of jib index for you as well.
Absolutely. And I think everything you're saying is sort of an abstraction. I mean, to your point, we can sort of analyze those things. We can quantify them. I think the thing we can't do is necessarily view them across the board. So you're not going to look into base running for every single player on the list necessarily. But if you're trying to make an argument for a Chase Utley or whoever else it is that they play hard, then you might pull that stat, and that might be your argument for why this player deserves to be there. So it's almost that we need to look at it a little less homogeneously and look at each individual player and really have a sense of why do I think they are good and how can I best prove that? Because to your point, we're measuring almost everything on the field these days with StatCast, with the radar, with everything else going on. If it's happening, we are measuring it. It's just a question of how you can abstract what is being measured there to make your point or to prove that the player does what you were thinking he does.
The only people that had had the most anomalous lists, there was only a few of them. We're all kind of in lockstep, but I'll just give you the names. So the people that were participating, we had as our player analysts, Carlos Pena, Bill Ripken, Dan O'Dowd, Tom Verducci, Ron Darling, Cliff Floyd, Chris Young. The Sabermetrics Super Panel I already mentioned, but our one-time guests, one per show, was Bob Costas, Joe Posnanski, Alex Fast, Keith Law, Hannah Kaiser, Stephanie Epstein, Rob Friedman, the pitching ninja, Eno Saris, Bill James himself, and Christopher Mad Dog Russo. And the biggest difference from the list came from, you could probably guess this, Christopher Mad Dog Russo, but also Bob Costas and, wait for it, Bill James. So these guys are all in, I think if I could wonder why, I think they're in a slightly different world than the rest of us are, including like Bill James, who was obviously, four-time World Series champion and everything else with the Red Sox and the guru of this whole movement and an outright genius. And yet he's kind of just not thinking, he's not reading everything, which everybody's saying. He's not doing that. Mad Dog has his own thing. And Bob Costas even has his own more like, historian angle on it. So those are the three, Sarah, that had a slightly different list. And I wonder, in the future where we go. I'll give you another example. I had an executive tell me that he went to his baseball ops people and he said, hey, rank our prospects, maybe their prospects or other teams' prospects. Come up with a list, give you top 50, and then come to me. Do your list separately. He said they came to him and they had essentially the same list.
Oh my God.
And he said, how are these the same list? And they go, well, this is how they're listed. This is the list. He said, yeah, but 5 years from now, this is not going to be how they're listed. So, like take a flyer on somebody. And eventually he said, this is a lesson for, all the students out there. Eventually the executive said to the baseball ops guys, if you both have the same list, why am I paying two of you? I don't need both of you if I get the same list. And I wonder how many teams will do that and incorporate, something beyond the metrics, the numbers, and do that evaluation without getting all scouty and vague, but employing things that they think is, that are real and tangible.
Well, that makes me think of your MLB Now All-Stars. We always talk about Chris Taylor as being sort of the quintessential BK player. And I think of guys like him, Max Muncy, not to only give the Dodgers credit, but they certainly deserve a lot of credit for the way they've scouted guys and the way they've managed to find sort of diamonds in the rough lately. And those are flyers. I mean, if any other team was ranking guys to potentially be playing first base, or now Muncy will be moving with Freddie Freeman, they probably wouldn't have come to Max Muncy particularly close to high on the list. They wouldn't have necessarily believed in his bat after the start of his career with the A's. So I do think those guys are important. And just on the less real world version, but for our list, I mean, those are the most fun conversations. We had one position this year, I believe it was one of the outfield positions, those haven't aired yet, where we all had a different number 10. And it's number 10. So it's not your best player on the list, but we all had somebody different. And that was one of the most fun conversations to have, was to go through that and say, okay, why are you advocating for a Mitch Haniger? Why are you advocating for whoever you have here? And it's really fun to have those guys. But of course, at the tops of these lists, 1 through 5, it's just more indisputable these days. But it's much more fun to, I made an argument for David Fletcher at third base my first year on top 10 right now. And I was just talking about bad ball hitting and contact rate and everything else. And I had him like 7th. I don't really know why. but I got to talk about him with you. I think I came on MLB Now. We talked about it, and he did not have a great year that year. But 2 years later, I mean, he was such a fan favorite for the Angels last year. And I was sitting there saying, well, I had him on the list. I knew what I was doing there. But it's really fun to pick out a guy and have one specific reason why you think he's really good. And I'm not in a front office, but I imagine that's how the Farhan Zaidis and the Dodgers and these teams like the Rays that are really ahead of the curve, that's what they're looking at, is finding a guy and finding one thing that they really think they can optimize.
Right. And you know what you did there, Sarah? You engaged cut of jib index. You like the cut of his jib. Right. But what you're reacting to is he puts the ball in play. He's contact hitter. He has this he has several skills, but he has an outrageous skill. And we like that. Just like I like Isaiah Kiner-Falefa so much in that he's top 10 in fielding, base running, plays all the infield positions, including catcher. It's like, wait a second, who does that? Nobody. Get me that guy. Get his agent on the phone. I'll give the one time, and it was so much fun. We only have a few minutes here, and we'll wrap up. We'd go for another hour. But the one time it was so great that we so disagreed. And when Juan Soto was moved to right field, we actually had to retape our right field segment. We taped them ahead of time, the Sabermetric Super Panel, and it was you, Vince Gennaro, Mike Petriello, and we all had to then stick Juan Soto in right field with Mookie Betts. And it was like, hey, who are you going to have at number one? And I thought it was very close, but I thought I'm going Betts. And I'm going Betts because I like him as a single game baseball player. I'll take him even though Soto was coming off that 2-month season of outrageous numbers, great numbers. And what was fascinating is you, Vince, and Mike all came in and said, oh yeah, it was Soto and it's not close. I go, Vince, not close? He goes, not close. Did everything but like take out the white glove and piff across my face. You know, and say, you doddering old fool, what's wrong with you? Like I thought, wait a second, this is an argument. You three were like, no, it's not. So what did you make of me then coming from the other side going, have you all three lost your minds?
Oh my gosh. First of all, that was the most outstanding and hilarious moment. I'm so excited for people to see our right field show this year because there was a little bit of a flashback as there had to be. But, you know, it made sense. See, that's the thing. I defended my point 100%. Juan Soto's the best hitter in baseball. I'm not putting him number 2 at his position. It was that simple for me. But everything you said made sense. Mookie Betts is more of an all-around player. Defense especially was on an entirely different level. And, you know, this was entering 2021. We were coming off the World Series for the Dodgers where Betts' defense was really on display. And, you know, maybe we're not considering postseason, whatever else, but we saw how Mookie Betts can really win a game and a series for a team. But everything you said made sense to me, but I still stood by what I'm saying with Juan Soto. But you know, it's rare that we have that kind of disagreement at the top, to your point. And it was really interesting. And, you know, just thinking about Twitter mentions and everything like that, and the reactions we got to that show, it does get into, and we don't really have time to get into this, but how we consider defense in this, because we don't really, the shredder is mostly looking at offensive performance and we're not really considering defense. But for you, defense was that deciding factor to put Betts over the top there. For us, it was, okay, defense is not going to discount Soto enough. So it's a conversation for another day, but I'm certainly going to be thinking about it for the next hour or so.
Oh no, and as Betts got off to a slow start and Soto was killing it, believe me, everyone out there, I was hearing it from Sarah and Petriello. Yeah, I heard it from everybody this year. I was like, I stand by my pick. I feel fine with it. Didn't work out the way I wanted. Didn't have a great season. One other thing, as to try to read what we used to call makeup, right? The makeup of the player. And that thing was so overdone for so many decades. I tired of it with all the old boys, right? But 2 years ago, I found room in my top 10 for Joey Votto. And Mike Petriello was saying, I'm not picking on him because he was just right with the facts, saying, BK, he's done. Look at this. And he pointed out 20 things to me. And I was like, yeah, but I think he's going to, his ability to adapt and evolve, I think he can come up with something. I think he's going to figure something out. Now, he didn't that next year, so I didn't put him on my next top 10. But what happened this year? Joey Votto figured it out. So sometimes it is belief in a person, belief in an athlete that no. And Sarah, now more than ever, your ability to learn is vitally important. Maybe that's the next wave, a player that can adapt, learn, use the tools to become a different player.
Absolutely. I mean, I know for me, whenever I see a quote from a player about using analytics, not just checking a few things, checking his batting average, but really using tools, my antenna perk up of, oh, that is someone to watch. That is a player who's going to be able to evolve himself. But to your point about Joey Votto, I mean, I just think of this is why, you know, as a numbers person, I think people often think that I am only ever going to go by the numbers, the hard numbers, the data, that is all that matters. But that's not true. The important thing with scouting and for front offices is combining both elements and is combining that field that Joey Votto can find a way to adapt and get it done. And the fact that, okay, his numbers weren't great, but if you look at his sweet spot rate, if you look at this, if you look at that, you could make the argument he could be on the upswing. So I just think that's why we're here for research and analytics, but it's vitally important to be able to marry the two together. And you just explained why. And you should be talking about that Joey Votto pick until the cows come home, because the season that he just had was so great. And you knew, you had that belief, even if it was a year early, that that would come back around for him.
Yeah, close enough, right?
Yeah.
We had one of our analysts say, I'm going to rip the shredder on this. And I said, you know, don't rip the shredder. The shredder is what it is. You're a human being. You're on this show. You can use the shredder's information and now apply it, you know, and add on the things that you know that the shredder can adjust to. And I look at it that way, that, yeah, it's yet another tool. And what's funny is I used to, back in the old days, Sarah, I used to just, I don't know if you know this, I used to rip into these old analysts and ex-players who operated with complete certitude. They knew, and all us geeks did not know, right? And it's like, okay. However, now, when we did have a little bit of a difference in the list, I was happy. I think Hannah Kaiser and Keith Law actually at one point said, I know you're going to rip me for this. I go, no, just please take a flyer, take a run at something, make Bo Bichette #1, do something different, you know, like just come up with somebody. I'm happy now. I'm not like, oh, how could you think that? Like, take a shot at it. So I think that, you know, kind of diversity of thought or adjusting your own personal formula, maybe that's the way, again, some of these teams will operate. And that combination of the scouty human element things and upside and makeup and all that, wedded to, of course, you know, the real life production, like what's actually being produced out on a baseball field, as far as we understand it, because we don't understand everything. So the more you learn, the more you realize how little we know. And, you know, we just do our best as we go along. So I don't think we've arrived, but I think it's important to look to see how far we've come, because we've certainly come a long way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, are we over our time? I don't know when we're supposed to. I mean, we could go forever, as you guys see. I mean, I love talking baseball with BK, but I don't want to set you guys back.
We'll wrap.
We have come a long way. We have come a long way, as you say, BK. So long. I think it's time for our first research presenter. And thank you to Brian. Thank you to Sarah. Another great opening to the SABR Analytics Conference. Can't wait to see you both in person next spring. Really looking forward to that.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you, Sarah. That was great.
Thank you.